Renfield. This film looks quite interesting, on paper. We take Dracula's bug-eating servant Renfield, infuse him with superpowers, and give him his own movie that is supposed to be some sort of a goofy sequel to classic Dracula films. Or to Dracula from 1931 in particular. This sequel is set in present time, and instead of Bela Lugosi, we have Nicolas Cage playing everyone's favorite vampire. A silly version of the vampire, because it is essentially a comedy. Kinda like Dracula Dead and Loving It, but about Renfield and with lots of blood. And also supposedly funnier than Dead and Loving It by Mel Brooks, which is a pretty bad movie, but we all pretend it is just mediocre because we all love Leslie Nielsen. So yeah, it all sounds like a movie you'd like to watch, especially if you learn who's behind all of this. The film is directed by Chris McKay, who previously worked extensively on Robot Chicken, and directed a surprisingly decent The Lego Batman movie. The script of Renfield is based on the story by Robert Kirkman, one of the creators of the Walking Dead comic books. All of this sounds quite promising, but the reality is, well, I wouldn't say it is a bad movie. It isn't. It has a really interesting premise, it has its moments. Nicolas Cage is quite good, but the main problem is that the movie runs out of ideas in like 30 minutes. The majority of Renfield is just some rather generic and uninspired quasi action movie with a generic uninspired plot and generic actors like Aquafina, who's supposed to be a comedian or something, except she's not funny at all. The plot of Renfield tells us the story of how the titular character struggles with the abuse from his master and starts visiting a self-help group of people who try to overcome their codependent toxic relationships. Which is, once again, kind of funny. Nice idea. It presents the relationship of Renfield and Dracula as some sort of domestic abuse. Interesting. Somehow, this motive of codependent relationships runs through the entire movie, even if it deserves essentially only a couple of 5-minute sketches. There is no need to turn it into the central theme of a goofy Dracula spin off and imply that we're dealing with a metaphor. This is just ridiculous, in a bad way. So the character of Renfield finds victims for Dracula and feeds them to his master, who is recovering from his wounds after yet another encounter with vampire hunters. Now they live in New Orleans, of all places, in an abandoned hospital, and they don't really have money. Renfield doesn't like any of this. The first part of the movie is indeed quite funny. They set up the story, we see a quite hilarious version of Dracula, we see black and white flashbacks where Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult are recreating a movie from 1931. We see this self-help group, we see that Renfield is in fact a killing machine at this point, capable of crushing skulls and tearing people apart with his bare hands. This is a good start. But then we have this Aquafina character who's trying to avenge the death of her father, who was killed by the crime syndicate that controls the city. She meets Renfield, and nothing interesting happens except for a couple of nice and quite bloody fighting scenes, and a joke about how the resurrected self-help group comes back traumatized by their experiences in the afterlife. It is amazing to watch how Universal Pictures squanders their horror franchises, which includes this weird Dracula Untold and then a hugely underwhelming reboot of The Mummy. The Invisible Man is the exception here, kind of. Well, it made something like 150 million on a tiny production budget. But that's not the case of Renfield, which essentially bombed at the box office, and there are very good reasons why it did. So, what have we learned from Renfield? Dracula is in a toxic relationship with his servant. Eating bugs gives you powers, switch to insect burgers now. Nobody fights crime more effectively than overweight cops. The afterlife of abused people is scary because they are sinners. In the end, Renfield feels like a missed opportunity. You have several really solid and promising ideas, but you need more of them for a full length comedy film. Renfield quickly becomes quite boring, quite generic, and not very funny. It is not necessarily a bad movie, it is just not good.